Do you ever wonder if you truly hold the power? Do you believe that badge turns you into some kind of god? Think again. Two officers figured they were simply cleaning up the streets when they arrested a black man at a gas station for no reason at all. They laughed right in his face. They mocked his clothes. They trampled on his rights. But they made one fatal mistake. They never bothered to find out who he really was. Because that man was not just some suspect. He was the Honorable Judge Harlan Voss. And the very next day, those two officers walked into a courtroom only to look up and see the man they had assaulted now sitting on the bench. What unfolded next was not simply justice. It was a brutal, unforgettable lesson in karma. Buckle up. The neon sign of the chevron buzzed with an irritating flicker, casting a sickly yellow glow over the wet asphalt. In Chicago, the air hung thick with humidity, the kind that clings to your skin and makes your shirt stick to your back. Harlan Voss stood by the pump, watching the numbers roll on the display of his vintage 1969 Mustang. He was not wearing his robes that night. He was not wearing one of his tailored Italian suits either. Harlan wore a faded gray hoodie, baggy sweatpants, and a pair of worn-out sneakers. He had just come from helping his elderly father move boxes out of the basement. He looked exhausted. He looked completely disheveled. To the untrained eye, he looked like nobody special. And that was exactly the problem for Officer Trent Callahan and his partner, Officer Kai Navarro. Their cruiser rolled into the station, tires crunching over discarded soda cans. Callahan was driving. He was a veteran of the force, known in the precinct for two things: his high arrest numbers and the growing pile of excessive force complaints that the union kept making disappear. Navarro was younger, eager to impress, and had already picked up Callahan's sneer. "Check him out," Callahan muttered, killing the headlights but leaving the engine running. He nodded toward Harlan. "Mustang like that in this neighborhood? Guy looks like he slept in a dumpster. Probably stolen." Navarro's hand drifted instinctively toward the door handle. "You want to run the plates?" "Nah," Callahan grinned, popping his gum. "Let's just have a chat. I'm bored." Harlan did not look up as the officers approached. He was thinking about the case docket waiting for him. He just wanted his gas, his Gatorade, and his bed. "Yo, Chief," Callahan barked. He did not say sir. He did not say, "Excuse me." Harlan paused, the gas nozzle still in his hand. He turned slowly. His face stayed calm, his eyes sharp and analytical, the gaze of a man who had spent years cutting through lies. "Can I help you, officers?" "Nice car," Callahan said, circling the vehicle and running his hand along the pristine hood. He stopped and leaned in close. "Whose is it?" "It's mine," Harlan answered, his voice deep and steady. "Yours?" Navarro laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. "Registration, ID. It's in the glove box. If you'll let me finish fueling, I'll get it for you." "Step away from the vehicle," Callahan suddenly shouted, his hand dropping to his holster. The escalation was instant, artificial, and practiced. "Hands on the roof, now." Harlan did not flinch. He knew the law better than he knew the back of his own hand. He knew they needed reasonable suspicion to detain him. They had none, but he also knew the harsh reality of the street. Arguing the Fourth Amendment at night with a jumpy cop was a good way to get shot. Harlan sighed, a sound heavy with profound exhaustion, and placed his hands on the cold metal of the Mustang's roof. "Spread them," Navarro ordered, kicking Harlan's ankles apart roughly. "Officer," Harlan said calmly, his cheek pressed against the wet metal, "I am going to ask you for the reasonable suspicion that led to this stop. I have not committed any traffic violation. I am simply pumping gas." Callahan froze. He hated it when people used big words. "Precipitated? You want suspicion? You match the description of a suspect involved in a carjacking a couple miles east. That good enough for you, lawyer man?" It was a lie. Harlan knew it. Callahan knew it. The radio had stayed silent. "Check his pockets," Callahan commanded. Navarro shoved his hands into Harlan's hoodie pockets. He pulled out a wallet, a pack of gum, and a receipt from a hardware store. He flipped the wallet open, but ignored the ID and went straight for the cash. "Got about $300 here," Navarro said, raising an eyebrow. "Drug money?" Harlan closed his eyes. "That is for a contractor. My father is renovating his house." "Sure it is," Callahan sneered. He grabbed the wallet and glanced at the license. Harlan J. Voss. The name meant nothing to him. He assumed Harlan was just another guy with a mouth. "You know what, Voss?" Callahan tossed the wallet onto the hood, scattering the cards. "You're giving me attitude. I don't like attitude. It makes me feel unsafe. I think you're resisting." "I am standing perfectly still," Harlan replied. "Stop resisting," Callahan screamed, grabbing Harlan's wrist and twisting it behind his back with enough force to pop the shoulder joint. Pain shot up Harlan's arm, but he bit his lip. He did not scream. He did not fight back. He let Navarro slam the cuffs on his wrists tighter than regulations allowed. "You're making a mistake," Harlan whispered as they shoved him toward the cruiser. "A very expensive mistake." Callahan slammed the door on Harlan's head on purpose before pushing him into the back seat. Leaning in, he whispered, his breath sour with stale coffee and tobacco. "I'm the law tonight, buddy. And tonight the law says you're taking a ride." The holding cell at the precinct smelled of urine, bleach, and despair. It was a concrete box painted in institutional green. They had processed Harlan like a piece of meat, fingerprints, mugshot. They had stripped him of his shoelaces and belt, leaving him holding up his sweatpants like a child. When he politely but firmly asked to make his phone call, the booking sergeant, a man named Ramirez with a stain on his shirt and a glaze in his eyes, just laughed. "Phone's broken, pal. Try again later." They threw him in the drunk tank. Harlan sat on the cold metal bench in the corner, surrounded by the usual late-night crowd. A kid caught tagging a wall, a weeping man in a tuxedo who had clearly had too much to drink at a wedding, and a homeless man screaming at invisible spiders. Harlan did not scream. He did not cry. He sat with his back straight, legs crossed at the ankles, eyes closed. He was meditating, but inside his mind, he was building a file. Exhibit A, lack of probable cause. Exhibit B, excessive force during cuffing. Exhibit C, denial of phone privileges. Exhibit D, theft. They had never logged the $300 he had watched Navarro pocket. Later, Callahan and Navarro walked past the cell bars, holding coffees and laughing. "Hey, Mustang!" Callahan yelled, rapping his baton against the bars. The noise made the drunk man jump. "You comfy in there? Maybe if you're nice, I'll let you go with a disorderly conduct charge. Save you a trip to the big house." Harlan opened his eyes. The room seemed to drop a few degrees. "Officer Callahan," he said. His voice was not loud, but it cut through the station noise like razor wire. "I have a hearing this morning. It is imperative that I be there." "A hearing?" Navarro snorted. "For what? Your parking tickets?" "I am presiding," Harlan said simply. The two cops stared at him for a second, then exploded into laughter. Callahan laughed so hard he spilled coffee on his boots. "Presiding?" he wheezed. "Oh, that's rich. You hear that, Kai? He's a judge. And I'm the Queen of England." Callahan walked up to the bars, his face inches from Harlan's. "Look at you. You're in sweatpants. You're nothing. You're a judge of what? The best flavor of crack?" Harlan did not blink. "Badge number 4922, Officer Trent Callahan. Badge number 5819, Officer Kai Navarro. I suggest you log my cash into evidence immediately, and I suggest you prepare a very good explanation for why I am currently detained without a warrant." Callahan's smile faded. There was something in Harlan's tone, the absolute, unwavering authority, that sent a tiny shiver of doubt down his spine. But his ego was too big to listen. "Shut him up," he muttered to the sergeant. "He's annoying me." They left him there. When the shift changed, a new sergeant, a woman named Morales, who actually did her job, walked past the cell. She stopped. She frowned. She looked at the man sitting in the corner, looking dignified despite the sweatpants. She unlocked the cell. "Sir," she asked tentatively, "you look familiar." "I should hope so, Sergeant Morales," Harlan said, standing and smoothing his hoodie. "I signed your warrant request for the 5th Street raid last week." Morales' face went white. She scrambled for the logbook. Judge Voss. Oh my God. The log says John Doe. Refused to identify." "I identified myself 3 times, Harlan said calmly. "Officer Callahan preferred his own version of reality. I need a phone, Sergeant, and I need a ride to the courthouse. I have a morning docket, and I believe Officers Callahan and Navarro are on the schedule for a preliminary hearing regarding the scattering of drug charges on the west side." "Yes, Your Honor. They are the arresting officers in State v. Langston." Harlan smiled. It was not a nice smile. It was the smile of a shark that had just smelled blood in the water. "Excellent," he said. "Don't tell them I have been released. Let them come to court." The sun rose over Chicago with deceptive beauty, painting the skyline in hues of gold and pink that reflected off the glass towers of the Loop. But down in the locker room of the precinct, the air was stale, smelling of Old Spice, sweat, and impending arrogance. Officer Trent Callahan stood in front of the scratch mirror, adjusting his tie. He liked court days. They meant overtime pay. They meant sitting in air conditioning instead of chasing people down alleyways. And most of all, they meant power. "You see the game last night?" Navarro asked, lacing up his patent leather dress shoes. "Caught the highlights," Callahan replied, checking his teeth. "Hey, you logged that cash from the gas station guy?" Navarro froze for a split second, then laughed. "Log it. I thought we were holding it for safekeeping, just in case he comes back for it." Callahan turned, a wolfish grin spreading across his face. "That's my boy. He won't come back. Guys like that get cut loose and run. He probably had a warrant 2 states over. He's halfway across the country by now." They shared a look of conspiratorial comfort. This was their routine, the street tax. They did not see themselves as corrupt. They saw themselves as the grim reapers of a chaotic city, taking a little off the top for their trouble. Who was going to stop them? Internal affairs was backlogged for years. The captain was counting down the days to retirement. They were untouchable. Teflon. "Let's go nail this Langston kid," Callahan said, slamming his locker shut. "I want to be out by lunch. There's a brisket sandwich with my name on it." The case of State v. Langston was a slam dunk in their eyes. They had arrested 18-year-old Trey Langston for possession with intent to distribute. They claimed they saw him drop a baggie of heroin. Trey claimed he was waiting for a bus, and they had planted it. It was the oldest story in the book, and usually the book ended with the badge winning. They drove to the Cook County Criminal Courthouse. The building was a fortress of limestone, imposing and heavy. As they walked through the metal detectors, bypassing the long line of civilians, they high-fived the deputies. They walked with the swagger of men who owned the building. They made their way to the courtroom. "Who's on the bench today?" Navarro asked, checking the docket posted outside the heavy oak doors. "Judge Henderson." Callahan shook his head. "Henderson's on medical leave. Probably gout again. It says visiting judge. Probably some substitute from traffic court. Easy pickings. They usually just rubber stamp whatever we say, because they're terrified of looking soft on crime." They pushed through the doors. The courtroom was buzzing. The air felt different today, tenser, sharper. The gallery was unusually full. A few reporters sat in the back row, notebooks out. That was odd for a preliminary hearing. Defense attorney Selena Brooks sat at her table, looking nervous. Next to her, Trey Langston looked terrified, his leg bouncing uncontrollably under the table. Callahan and Navarro took their seats in the front row behind the prosecutor, a young, overworked assistant state's attorney named Caleb Thorne. "Hey, Caleb," Callahan whispered, leaning forward. "We're good to go. Quick in and out?" Thorne turned around. He looked pale. He was sweating. "I wouldn't bet on it, Trent. Have you heard who the visiting judge is?" "No," Callahan shrugged. "Who cares?" "Harlan Voss," Thorne whispered. The name dropped from his lips like a lead weight. Callahan frowned. The name sounded familiar, but he could not place it. "So?" Thorne hissed. "He's legendary. He spent years as a civil rights attorney before he took the bench. He eats bad procedure for breakfast. He has been presiding over the federal corruption probe downtown. I don't know why he is slumming it in state court today, but everybody is on edge. You guys better have your paperwork perfect." Navarro swallowed hard. "Voss, is he strict?" "He is not strict," Thorne said, turning back to his files. "He is surgical." Callahan leaned back, crossing his arms. He felt a flicker of annoyance. He hated activist judges, but he was not worried. He was Officer Trent Callahan. He knew how to play the game. He would just use his command voice, stick to the script, and this Voss guy would have no choice but to bind Langston over for trial. "Relax," he whispered to Navarro. "It is just a judge." They all put their robes on one leg at a time. The side door opened. The bailiff, a towering man with a voice like a foghorn, stepped forward. "All rise." The room shuffled to its feet, the rustle of fabric and the creak of benches filling the air. Then Judge Harlan Voss walked in. He moved with silent, predatory grace. Harlan Voss was no longer the man in the gray hoodie. He was transformed. He wore a judicial robe that seemed to swallow the light, tailored perfectly to his broad shoulders. Underneath, the collar of a crisp white shirt and a silk tie were visible. But it was his face that froze the blood in Trent Callahan's veins. Harlan ascended the steps to the bench. He did not look at the files. He did not look at the clerk. He looked straight ahead, scanning the courtroom with eyes that were cold, hard, and utterly devoid of mercy. He stood behind his high chair for a moment, letting the silence stretch. It was a power move. He was letting them sweat. Then his gaze locked onto the front row. He found Callahan. For a moment, Callahan did not recognize him. The context was too different. The man at the gas station had been a thug, a nobody. This man was a titan of the law. But then Harlan tilted his head slightly to the left, a small, subtle movement, and raised his left hand to adjust his glasses. On his left wrist, just peeking out from the sleeve of the robe, was a dark purple bruise, the shape of a thumb. The memory of the gas station slammed into Callahan like a freight train. The Mustang, the hoodie, the twist of the arm. "I am presiding." Callahan's mouth opened, but no sound came out. His world tilted on its axis. The fluorescent lights of the courtroom suddenly seemed brighter, harsher. He felt a bead of sweat roll down his spine, icy cold. He nudged Navarro. "Kai!" he choked out. Navarro looked up. He followed Callahan's gaze. He saw the judge. He saw the face of the man he had kicked the night before. Navarro turned the color of ash. He gripped the bench in front of him until his knuckles turned white. "Oh, no," he whispered. "Oh, God, Trent, that is him." "Be seated," Judge Voss said. His voice was the same deep, resonant voice Callahan had mocked. "Judge of what? The best flavor of crack." The words echoed in Callahan's head, mocking him. Harlan sat down. He opened the file in front of him slowly, deliberately. He took a pen from his pocket. He did not look up. Calling case number 449002, State of Illinois versus Trey Langston, Harlan announced. Charges: possession of a controlled substance, resisting arrest. Ready for the people, Your Honor, Thorne squeaked. Ready for the defense, Brooks said, sounding more confident than she had moments earlier. She had sensed the shift in the room. She saw the way the judge was looking at the officers. I see we have a preliminary hearing today, Harlan said. He finally looked up, his eyes boring into Callahan. And the arresting officers are present. Yes, Your Honor, Thorne said. Officers Callahan and Navarro. Callahan and Navarro? Harlan repeated the names. He tasted them. He made them sound like a diagnosis of a terminal illness. I see. Well, let us not waste the taxpayers' time. Prosecutor, call your first witness. The state called Officer Trent Callahan to the stand. Callahan stood up. His legs felt like lead. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to bolt out the back doors and never stop. But he could not. He was trapped. He walked to the witness stand. He felt the eyes of the entire room on him. But the only eyes that mattered were the ones behind the bench. Raise your right hand, the clerk droned. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Callahan raised his shaking hand. I do. Take a seat, officer, Harlan said. He leaned forward, clasping his hands together. And please, Officer Callahan, speak clearly. I want to hear every single word you have to say today. I am very interested in your version of the truth. The direct examination by the prosecutor was a disaster, mostly because Callahan could not stop stuttering. The usually cocky officer was sweating profusely, wiping his forehead with a handkerchief every few seconds. He gave the standard spiel. They were on patrol. They saw the defendant. They saw the drop. But the air in the room was suffocating. Everyone was waiting for the other shoe to drop. Then it was the defense attorney's turn. But before Selena Brooks could stand, Judge Voss raised a hand. Miss Brooks, if you will indulge me, Harlan said softly. I have a few clarifying questions for the officer myself before you begin cross. Is that acceptable? Absolutely, Your Honor, Brooks said, sitting back down with a small smile. She knew when to get out of the way. Harlan swiveled his chair to face Callahan directly. The distance between them was less than 10 feet, but it felt like a mile of hostile territory. Officer Callahan, Harlan began, his voice deceptively polite. You stated that you observed Mr. Langston from a distance of 50 feet. Is that correct? Yes, Your Honor. And the lighting conditions. It was night, was it not? It was. There were street lights, Your Honor. I see you have excellent night vision. Then you are a man who pays close attention to detail. I like to think so. It is part of the job. Harlan nodded slowly. Detail is indeed important. Tell me, Officer Callahan, does the precinct have a policy regarding the identification of suspects before physical force is applied? Callahan swallowed. Yes, we identify first, unless there is an immediate threat. An immediate threat? Harlan repeated. Like pumping gas or waiting for a bus? Objection. Thorne stood up instinctively, confused. Relevance. Overruled, Harlan snapped, his voice cracking like a whip. I am testing the officer's credibility regarding his adherence to procedure. Sit down, Mr. Thorne. Harlan turned back to Callahan. Let us talk about credibility, officer. You claim you saw a small baggie of narcotics in Mr. Langston's hand from 50 feet away in the dark. Yet is it possible for a seasoned officer to make mistakes about what they see? Is it possible, for instance, to mistake a prominent local judge for a carjacker? The courtroom went dead silent. You could hear a pin drop. Callahan looked like he was going to vomit. Your Honor, Is it possible, Harlan continued, his voice rising in volume, to mistake a wallet for a weapon? To mistake a request for an explanation for resisting arrest? I don't know what you mean, Callahan lied, his voice trembling. Don't you? Harlan leaned back. Let us create a hypothetical, officer. Let us imagine an officer stops a citizen without probable cause. Let us say he slams that citizen's head into a car door. Let us say he steals $300 from that citizen's wallet. And then let us say that officer stands in a court of law the next morning and asks the court to trust his word against an 18-year-old boy. Would you trust that officer, Callahan? Callahan stared at his hands. He could not breathe. Answer the question, Harlan roared. The sound made the jurors in the box jump. No, Callahan whispered. No, I wouldn't. Then why should I trust you? Harlan asked, his voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. Harlan picked up a piece of paper from his desk. I have here the arrest report for Trey Langston. You wrote it, you signed it, you swore to it. He picked up another piece of paper. And this is a printout of the precinct's booking log from last night. Entry: a John Doe arrested for disorderly conduct. Arresting officers Callahan and Navarro. Harlan held the paper up for the court to see. That John Doe was me, Officer Callahan. The courtroom erupted. Reporters jumped to their feet. The defense attorney gasped. The prosecutor put his head in his hands. The gavel banged down, but Harlan did not need it. His voice cut through the chaos. Order, Harlan commanded. I said order. The room fell silent again, buzzing with kinetic energy. Officer Callahan, Harlan said, his eyes burning with a righteous fire, you are currently under oath. You have just testified that you are a truthful and observant officer. I am going to give you one chance, one single chance, to amend your testimony regarding the events of last night. Did you or did you not plant that evidence on Mr. Langston? Callahan looked at Navarro in the front row. Navarro was weeping silently, his head in his hands. The shield of the blue wall had shattered. There was no union rep here to save him. There was no captain to sweep it under the rug. There was only the judge. Callahan looked at Trey Langston, the kid he was trying to send to prison for years just to boost his stats. Then he looked at Harlan. Callahan's voice broke. I take the Fifth. The Fifth Amendment protects you against self-incrimination, Harlan said coldly. It does not protect you from the consequences of perjury committed in my courtroom. But your silence speaks volumes. Harlan turned to the court reporter. Strike the witness's entire testimony from the record. He turned to the prosecutor. Mr. Thorne, do you have any other evidence against Mr. Langston? Any evidence that does not rely on the word of these two officers? Thorne stood up, shaking his head. No, Your Honor. The state moves to dismiss. Motion granted, Harlan said. Mr. Langston, you are free to go. I apologize on behalf of the state of Illinois for this inconvenience. Trey Langston looked stunned. He grabbed his lawyer's hand. Thank you, he whispered. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, Harlan said, his eyes shifting back to Callahan, who was still sitting in the witness chair, looking like a trapped rat. Because we are not done. Bailiff, secure the doors. Nobody leaves this courtroom. Harlan reached under his bench and pulled out a new file. We have dealt with State versus Langston, he said. Now we are going to deal with a new matter. I am initiating a summary contempt proceeding, and I am issuing a bench warrant. He pointed a finger at Callahan. Officer Callahan, you are in contempt of this court. You have perjured yourself. You have attempted to defraud this judicial body. And based on my personal observation, which is admissible in a summary proceeding, I am charging you and Officer Navarro with false imprisonment, assault, and official misconduct. Harlan stood up, his robes billowing. Bailiff, he pointed to Callahan and Navarro, take them into custody. The silence that followed Judge Voss's order was absolute. It was a vacuum, sucking the air out of the courtroom. The gallery, usually a hive of whispered gossip and shuffling papers, was frozen in a tableau of shock. "Me," Callahan choked out, his voice cracking, his face, usually flushed with the arrogance of authority, drained of all color until it matched the gray of the courtroom walls. You can't arrest me. I'm an officer of the law. I have immunity." "You were an officer of the law," Harlan corrected, his voice cutting through the stagnation like a diamond cutter. He did not shout. He did not need to. The robe amplified his authority 1,000-fold. "Right now, Mr. Callahan, you are a defendant in a summary contempt proceeding. And in my courtroom, defendants stand when addressed." Callahan did not stand. He could not. His legs had turned to water. The psychological blow of seeing his victim, the man he had mocked, beaten, and robbed, sitting on the high bench was too much for his brain to process. The bailiff, a 20-year veteran named Darius Kane, who had seen every kind of criminal pass through these doors, did not hesitate. Darius had always known Callahan was a bully. The whispers in the precinct were an open secret. He walked over to the witness stand, his heavy boots thudding against the carpet. Darius unclipped his own handcuffs from his belt. The metallic rasp was deafening in the quiet room. "Stand up, Callahan," Darius grunted, grabbing the officer by the elbow. He did not use excessive force, but he did not use the gentle touch of a colleague either. He used the firm, unyielding grip of the state. Callahan stumbled to his feet, his eyes wide and unseeing. He looked at the prosecutor, Caleb Thorne. Caleb, do something. This is insane. He's crazy." Thorne, pale and sweating, stared studiously at his table, refusing to make eye contact. He knew a sinking ship when he saw one, and he was not about to drown with the captain. Click, click. The sound of the handcuffs ratcheting shut echoed off the high limestone ceiling. It was the exact same sound that had snapped onto Harlan's wrists at the gas station. But this time, the geometry of power was inverted. The predator had become the prey. "You have the right to remain silent," Harlan recited from the bench, his eyes never leaving Callahan. "Anything you say can and will be used against you. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford one, one will be provided for you." Harlan paused, a cold, ironic smile barely touching his lips. "I suggest you find a very good one, Mr. Callahan, because unlike the public defenders you so often mock and bully in the hallways, yours will need to work miracles to explain why you assaulted a member of the judiciary." In the front row, Officer Kai Navarro was hyperventilating. He watched his partner being manhandled and realized his own fate was sealed. He tried to stand up, perhaps to run, perhaps to beg, but two sheriff's deputies were already flanking him. They slammed him against the wall efficiently, professionally. "I was just following orders," Navarro screamed as they cuffed him, his voice high and thin with panic. "He told me to do it. Callahan told me to search the car. I didn't want to." "Save it for the plea deal, son," one of the deputies muttered, spinning Navarro around and marching him toward the side door. The heavy steel door reserved for prisoners, not police. As the officers were hauled out of the courtroom, the spell broke. The gallery erupted. Reporters were frantically typing on their phones, their thumbs blurring. Judge arrests cops in own courtroom. Justice served cold. The Mustang judge. The headlines were writing themselves. But Harlan was not done. He was just getting started. "Order," Harlan commanded, tapping his gavel once. "Mr. Thorne." The prosecutor jumped as if he had been electrocuted. Yes, Your Honor." "I am recusing myself from the criminal prosecution of these two men," Harlan announced, his voice dropping to a business-like register. "As the victim of the assault, I cannot be the trier of fact in their criminal trial. However, as the presiding judge of this preliminary hearing, I have the authority to secure evidence." Harlan leaned forward, his eyes boring into Thorne. "I am ordering that the dash cam footage and the body cam footage from the precinct patrol unit be subpoenaed immediately. I want the hard drives on my desk by noon. If they are lost, corrupted, or accidentally deleted, I will hold the precinct captain in contempt. Is that clear?" "Crystal clear, Your Honor," Thorne stammered. "I'll go get them personally right now." "And Mr. Thorne?" "Yes. Check the evidence locker. If my $300 is not there, and based on Officer Navarro's reaction, I suspect it is currently in his locker or his wallet, add theft by a public servant to the charge sheet, and add a civil rights violation under Title 18 while you are at it." "It will be done, Judge." Thorne practically ran out of the courtroom, desperate to be on the right side of history. Down in the basement of the courthouse in the holding intake, the atmosphere was toxic. Callahan and Navarro were stripped of their belts, their shoelaces, and their badges. The items were placed into plastic bags labeled "Personal Effects of Prisoner." Callahan sat on the cold metal bench, the same type of bench Harlan had sat on the night before. He stared at the concrete floor. The adrenaline had worn off, replaced by a crushing, nauseating dread. He knew the law. He knew exactly what happened to cops in prison. "You idiot!" Navarro hissed from the corner. "You arrogant idiot! Just a nobody. That is what you said. Just a guy with a Mustang." "Shut up, Kai." "No, I won't shut up," Navarro yelled, tears streaming down his face. "I have a baby on the way, Trent. I have a mortgage. I am going to lose everything because you wanted to play tough guy. I am telling them everything. I am telling them about the skim. I am telling them about the planted evidence in the Langston case. I am telling them about the gas station. Everything." Callahan did not respond. He just closed his eyes, listening to the sound of his own life imploding. By the time the story broke, it had gone nuclear. The footage had been leaked. Nobody knew by whom, though everyone suspected Harlan's clerk. The video played on a loop on every channel in Chicago. It showed everything. The grainy, low-light footage of Harlan pumping gas, the aggressive, tactical approach of the cruiser, the mocking laughter as Callahan slapped the cuffs on, the clear, undeniable audio of Callahan twisting Harlan's arm while Harlan calmly stated, "I am presiding." It was viral gold. It was undeniable proof of what every community activist had been saying for decades. But this time, the victim was the ultimate symbol of the establishment. News vans were parked 3 deep outside the precinct. The police chief, a man who usually enjoyed the limelight, was nowhere to be found. The Fraternal Order of Police, usually so vocal in defending their own, issued a 2-sentence statement acknowledging serious allegations and promising an internal review. But everyone knew the internal review did not matter. The court of public opinion had already returned a verdict. In chambers, Harlan Voss sat watching the news on a small TV in the corner. He had removed his robe. He was back in his suit, nursing a cup of tea. His left wrist was wrapped in an ACE bandage, throbbing in time with his heartbeat. He felt a strange mixture of exhaustion and clarity. He had spent years in the legal system, but today was the first time he felt he had truly touched the raw nerve of justice. His clerk, Lena, knocked on the door. Her eyes were wide with a mix of awe and excitement. "Judge," she said softly, "the phone has not stopped ringing. The mayor called. The governor called. CNN is on the line, too. But there is someone here to see you. It is Trey Langston." Harlan turned off the TV. The noise of the pundits was giving him a headache. "Send him in, Lena." Trey walked in. He looked small in the large oak-paneled office, surrounded by leather-bound law books. He was holding a crumpled baseball cap in his hands, twisting it nervously. He looked at the floor, then at the bookshelves, then finally at Harlan. I wanted to say thanks," Trey whispered. "For real." Nobody ever stood up for me like that. I thought I was gone. My public defender said years mandatory minimum. I was ready to plead out just to get it over with. Harlan stood up and walked around the heavy desk. He extended his hand, the one with the bandage. "You do not need to thank me for doing my job, Trey," Harlan said, his voice warm. "But I need you to understand something. Today was not a miracle. It was a mistake, a glitch in the matrix." Trey looked up, confused. "Sir?" "The system worked today because I was the one in the hoodie," Harlan said intensely. "If I had been anyone else, if I had been a teacher, a mechanic, a nurse, you would be going to jail, and Officer Callahan would be at a bar celebrating his arrest stats. That is not justice. That is luck." Harlan placed a hand on the young man's shoulder. "So I need you to do something for me. You have a second chance now. A clean slate. Go home. Finish school. Do not let this city break you. Do not let the anger consume you. Use it." Trey stared at him for a long moment. He saw the bruise on the judge's wrist, the tiredness in his eyes. "Use it how?" Trey asked. "Become a lawyer," Harlan said, a small smile appearing. "Become a judge. Get into this room on your own merit. Change the damn system from the inside, so that the next time a kid is waiting for a bus, he does not need a judge and a Mustang to save him." A spark lit up in Trey's eyes. It was the first time in a long time he had looked at an authority figure and seen a path forward rather than a wall. "Yes, sir," Trey said, standing a little taller. "I think I would like that." Harlan watched him leave. He walked to the window and looked out at the Chicago skyline. The city was vast, complicated, and broken. But for one day, the scales had tipped in the right direction, and Harlan knew that tomorrow the real fight, the trial of Callahan and Navarro, would begin. Winter descended on Chicago with a vengeance that year. The wind howled off Lake Michigan, turning the city into a grid of gray slush and biting cold. It was a fitting backdrop for the end of Officer Trent Callahan's career. Time had passed since the incident at the Chevron station. In that time, the world of the precinct had been turned upside down. The blue wall of silence, usually so impenetrable, had crumbled under the weight of high-definition video and the unimpeachable testimony of a sitting judge. For Trent Callahan, the fall had been absolute. He was no longer the swaggering king of the night shift. He was a pariah. His union representative had quietly stopped returning his calls after the dash cam footage leaked to the Chicago Tribune. His wife, tired of the late nights and the sudden terrifying scrutiny of reporters on their lawn, had taken the kids and moved to her sister's in Wisconsin. Callahan sat at the defense table in the courtroom, picking at a loose thread on the sleeve of a suit he had bought at a discount outlet. It was ill-fitting, bunching at the shoulders, making him look smaller than he was. Beside him sat Kai Navarro. The younger officer looked like a ghost. He had lost weight. His eyes were hollow, darting around the room as if expecting a trap door to open beneath him. The courtroom was packed to capacity. The gallery was a sea of faces. Community activists, law students, curious citizens, and a heavy contingent of off-duty officers who were there not to support Callahan, but to see which way the wind was blowing. Presiding over the case was Judge Evelyn Hart. If Harlan Voss was a scalpel, precise and surgical, Judge Hart was a hammer. She was a legend in the Cook County system, a woman who had spent years as a prosecutor before taking the bench. She had zero tolerance for nonsense and even less for corruption. "All rise," the bailiff bellowed. Judge Hart swept into the room, her black robes billowing like storm clouds. She took her seat, adjusted her glasses, and looked down at the defense table with a gaze that could strip paint. "Be seated," she commanded. "We are here for closing arguments and sentencing in the matter of the people versus Callahan and Navarro. But before we proceed, I understand the defense has a final motion." Callahan's lawyer, a sweaty man named Victor Lang, who usually handled DUI cases, stood up. He looked out of his depth. "Yes, Your Honor," Lang stammered. "We move for a mistrial based on prejudicial publicity. The video has been viewed millions of times online. There is no way this jury can be impartial." Judge Hart did not even blink. "Mr. Lang, the video is evidence. The fact that the public has seen your client assault a citizen does not grant him immunity from the consequences." Motion denied. Sit down. The trial had been a slow-motion car crash for the defense. The prosecution, led by a special prosecutor brought in from Springfield to avoid conflict of interest, had been ruthless. They had played the video, then they played it in slow motion, then they played the audio of Callahan laughing. But the defining moment, the moment etched into the minds of every person in the room, had been Harlan Voss's testimony days earlier. Lang had tried to be clever. He had tried to paint Harlan as the aggressor, a man who baited the police. Flashback to the testimony. "Judge Voss," Lang had asked, pacing in front of the witness stand, "you are a man of the law. You know how dangerous the streets are. Why didn't you just show your badge immediately? Why did you hide who you were? Isn't it true that you wanted this to happen, that you entrapped these officers?" Harlan had sat in the witness chair, his demeanor calm, almost serene. He leaned into the microphone. "Mr. Lang," Harlan had replied, his voice filling the room without shouting, "I did not show my badge because I was not wearing it. I was buying Gatorade, and nowhere in the Constitution does it say that a citizen must be a judge to be treated with basic human dignity. I did not hide who I was. I was a citizen of Chicago. If that was not enough for your client to treat me with respect, then the problem is not my ID. The problem is your client." The jury had nodded in unison. That was the nail in the coffin. Back in the present, the jury foreman stood up. He was a middle-aged mechanic, a man with grease-stained hands who looked like he brooked no nonsense. "Have you reached a verdict?" Judge Hart asked. "We have, Your Honor." Callahan stopped breathing. The air in the room seemed to adhere to his skin, hot and suffocating. Navarro put his head in his hands. "On the charge of official misconduct," the foreman read, "we find the defendant, Trent Callahan, guilty." A gasp rippled through the room. "On the charge of aggravated battery in a public place, guilty. On the charge of perjury, guilty. On the charge of theft, guilty." Each guilty was a physical blow. Callahan flinched with every count. The veneer of the tough cop, the Teflon badge, the arrogance of the station house, it was all stripped away, leaving a terrified middle-aged man facing the ruin of his life. When the foreman read the verdicts for Navarro, they were slightly lighter. He was acquitted of the assault, but guilty of the misconduct and the theft. He had followed orders, but he had also followed Callahan into the abyss. Judge Hart nodded. "The jury is dismissed with the gratitude of the court." She turned her attention to the two men standing before her. The silence stretched out, heavy and absolute. "Gentlemen," Judge Hart began, her voice low and dangerous, "I have sat on this bench for years. I have sent murderers, rapists, and gang leaders to prison. But nothing disgusts me more than a dirty badge." She picked up a file from her desk. "Mr. Callahan, you did not just break the law. You broke the covenant between the people and the state. You relied on the fear of the citizens to protect you. You thought that because you had a gun and a radio, you were a god. You thought you could take a man's money, break his arm, and laugh about it because he was nobody." She leaned forward, her eyes locking onto Callahan. "But you forgot the most basic lesson of democracy. There are no nobodies. And when you strike a citizen, you strike us all. You assaulted a judge. Yes. But as Judge Voss testified, his title is irrelevant. You assaulted a human being." Callahan tried to speak. "Your Honor, I served for years, and—" "You undid every day of that service in minutes," Hart cut him off. "You are a bully, Mr. Callahan, and bullies do not fare well in my courtroom." She looked at the sentencing guidelines. "Trent Callahan, for the crimes you have been convicted of, and with the aggravating factor of abusing your public office, I sentence you to a total of 15 years in the Illinois Department of Corrections. You will serve at least 85% of that sentence. You are remanded to custody immediately." Callahan's knees buckled. He grabbed the defense table to keep from collapsing. 15 years. He would be an old man when he saw the sky as a free man again. "As for you, Navarro," Hart continued, turning to the sobbing younger man, "you are young. You were influenced by a superior. But you had a choice. You could have said no. You could have reported him. Instead, you took the money. You are sentenced to 5 years. The gavel came down. Bang! The sound was final. It was the period at the end of a long, ugly sentence. As the bailiffs moved in, real corrections officers this time, wearing the dark uniforms of the state prison system, the reality set in. Callahan held out his hands. The clicking of the handcuffs was the only sound in the room. He turned around, desperate for a lifeline. He scanned the gallery. He saw the reporters, their pens flying across notepads. He saw the activists nodding in grim satisfaction. And then he saw him. Harlan Voss was sitting in the back row near the exit. He was not smiling. He was not cheering. He looked sad. Callahan locked eyes with the man he had tormented. In that moment, the memory of the gas station played out between them. The laughter, the insults. Judge of what? The best flavor of crack. Callahan's lips trembled. He realized too late the enormity of his mistake. It was not just that he had arrested a judge. It was that he had become the very thing he swore to fight. A criminal. "I'm sorry," Callahan mouthed across the room. It was soundless, but Harlan saw it. Harlan did not look away. He offered a slow, solemn nod. It was not forgiveness. That was not for him to give right now. But it was an acknowledgment. The debt is paid. The side door opened, and the officers led Callahan and Navarro away. The heavy door clicked shut, swallowing them into the bowels of the correction system. Harlan stood up. He buttoned his coat. He felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned to see Trey Langston. The young man looked different now. He was wearing a shirt and tie. He stood straighter. The fear that had defined him months earlier was gone, replaced by a quiet confidence. "Is it over?" Trey asked. "The trial is over," Harlan said, his voice weary but strong. "But the work is not." They walked out of the courtroom together, the judge and the young man whose lives had been inextricably bound by a random act of injustice. Outside, the snow had stopped. The air was crisp and clean. A flank of reporters waited at the bottom of the courthouse steps, microphones raised like spears. "Judge Voss. Judge Voss. Do you feel vindicated? Judge, what is your message to the police force today?" Harlan paused on the landing. He looked out at the city skyline, the buildings gleaming in the winter sun. He thought about the thousands of officers who did the job right every day. And he thought about the ones like Callahan who rotted the system from the inside. He stepped up to the microphones. "Vindication is a cheap word," Harlan said, his voice carrying over the crowd. "This was not about me. This was about the fact that justice cannot be blind if the people enforcing it are corrupt. Today, the system worked. But it worked because I had the privilege of position. It worked because I knew the law. My concern and my mission is for the people who do not have those shields." He looked directly into the camera lens. "To every officer who wears the badge with honor, We see you and we thank you. But to those who think the badge is a shield for their own ego, remember Trent Callahan. The law is patient. The law is long. And eventually the law wins. Harlan turned and walked away, leaving the chaos of the media behind him. He walked toward his car, the snow crunching under his boots. He took out his phone and dialed a number. "Hello," a voice answered. "Admissions office? University of Chicago Law School." "Yes, hello," Harlan said, glancing back at Trey Langston, who was walking toward the bus stop. "This is Judge Harlan Voss. I would like to request an application packet for a prospective student. His name is Trey Langston. I will be writing his letter of recommendation personally." Harlan smiled for the first time in months. He hung up the phone, got into his car, and drove off into the city. The scales were balanced. The docket was cleared. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how the gavel strikes back. Trent Callahan thought he was the predator, but he picked a fight with the wrong prey. He lost his badge, his freedom, and his pride, all because he judged a book by its cover. This story is a reminder. Character is what you do when you think no one is watching. Power is not about the uniform you wear. It is about the integrity you carry. Judge Voss did not just win a court case. He saved a young man's future and cleaned up the streets in a way he never could have from the bench alone. If you believe that nobody is above the law, whether they have a badge, a gavel, or a hoodie, hit that like button right now. It helps us share these stories of justice. And if you want more true crime drama and karma payback stories like this, smash that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss an upload. What would you have done if you were Judge Voss? Would you have revealed yourself at the gas station or waited for the courtroom trap? Let me know in the comments below. Stay safe, stay smart, and I will see you in the next one.